Okay, so this is just a quick overview of a Modano model. This is designed for somebody who's just been given a Modano model to run with and wants to learn a little bit more about structure, functionality, how to insert categories and things like that. So I'll just use one of the generic monthly historical forecast models, as we'll cover off on the rolling mechanism as well. So model will open on the overview worksheet. This is a hyperlinked table of contents. So if you want to navigate throughout the model, it's incredibly easy just to click on a link. That'll take you to that worksheet. And if you click on the hyperlink in cell A1 of any worksheet, that'll bring you back to this overview sheet. So really simple, quick navigation mechanism called two-click navigation, and should make the model very easy to move around in. Now, if you get an alert or an error in your model, all you have to do is go across to the error check summary. Now, as with the overview sheet, this is also a hyperlink back into the core content of the model, and each of these rows represents a certain type of check that the Modano content automatically builds in when it's inserted into the model. Main thing just to note, error checks are typically a problem with the model. So for example, if your balance sheet is not balancing, that is definitely an error. If there are error values, obviously that's an error as well. By comparison, the alerts are things that you should be aware of. Now, in this instance, I've created negative cash. That's classed as an alert check because it's something for somebody to possibly consider. It might not necessarily be an actual error. And even though there aren't any built into this model, there's also sensitivity checks. And that's also incredibly valuable, so that if anybody's looking at a dashboard whilst the sensitivity is running, again, the model name tells them that there is a sensitivity running, and people don't assume that the high valuation case is really the base case and so on. Now, if I click on the balance sheet hyperlink, that will take me to the area of the model where there is an issue. And at that point, I can obviously investigate the reasons behind it, change my assumptions, and ideally you want to be working with a model that doesn't have any errors or alerts flashed out in the model name. One thing just to note is that these models are obviously integrated. So the balance sheet's cash line is made up of the previous period's closing cash plus the movement in the cash flow statement. And the retained profits are made up of the previous period's retained profits plus the net profit after tax. Now, in terms of these financials, these are what we refer to as all periods worksheets. So these present both historical and forecast information on a seamless basis. By comparison, this model also has historical worksheets, so they only have content up to our latest historical date. And in terms of the forecast worksheets, these actually automatically hide any historical data. So these workbooks are incredibly efficient in terms of only showing you information that's relevant to the time frame that is currently active within the model. Now, if I go to the revenue assumptions, in addition to grouping away those data points that are in the past, you'll also notice that they've been whited out. And this is what we refer to as inactive assumptions. In terms of data entry, even if I were to enter revenue numbers in the historical part of the revenue module, these aren't going to have any impact on the model. And in terms of communication, they've also got inactive assumption conditional formatting on to tell you that that's the case. They've also got data validation on them, so you can't type things like dog into an assumption cell that it is expecting a financial value. So from a user perspective, we should really be just entering assumptions into the dedicated assumption cells, which, as I say, in this instance, they are blue. You can easily go up and change your workbook themes. So for example, if you have a corporate standard, it's very easy to create a corporate standard theme and to have all of your models reflecting that so that everyone understands, okay, this assumption style means this is where I enter my data. So yeah, incredibly user-friendly models. Now, I'm not going to cover off here on the different assumptions in the model other than to talk through the actual time series side of things. So as we mentioned, these models are rolling, so they have a historical area and a forecast area and all periods that stitch those two together. In terms of rolling these models forwards, if I go to the time worksheet, I can change my last historical date and this model will naturally roll forwards. So it'll add another historical column for me. It will hide what were previously active forecast assumptions as they're no longer relevant. And if I look on the financials, it's now stitching together an extra historical period in place of what was previously that forecast number. So in terms of your month-end model roll forward, Modano models are incredibly efficient in terms of that overall time series infrastructure. And obviously, if you need to extend your model, that's as simple as going to the time series assumption sheet again and entering a new duration, and your model will stretch out automatically. One thing just to note though, you can shorten your model and delete all your assumptions. So just be aware of any impacts that you're putting through. You should get a little dialog up that will actually indicate when assumptions are being deleted. Now, I'll just give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the other Modano functionality. There are a lot of videos on the main Modano website that will cover off on all of this in detail. So if anything looks interesting or you want further information, then definitely go to the main Modano website. So for example, if I need more categories of revenue, all I have to do is right click and Modano will automatically insert those. Now it's obviously not just inserted the assumptions, it's inserted the calculations. If I hop across to the financials, they've also been obviously updated to reflect the new structure. And I can easily delete content as well. So if I delete a revenue category from the income statement, it will also be removed back in its underlying revenue module as well. So automatically adding and removing categories is really at the heart of the Modano system, and that doesn't just apply on a category basis. So for example, if I hop across to the debt structuring, I can easily right click and add an entirely new debt tranche, and that will automatically be built in to my model, even though it is a dedicated multi-row schedule. So incredibly powerful stuff, and gives you the ability to rescale your model without having to change a whole load of calculations and cutting and pasting and copying and extending sum ranges and so on. Now, depending on your access levels, you might also be working at that modular level. So whilst that example just then added and removed a single category of revenue, we might have an entirely new division. So the way I would create that within Modano is one of a couple of ways. I could make a copy of the existing revenue module that's contained within the model, or I could insert an entirely new revenue module. Now let's just assume I'm looking to get into the hotels business, so all I actually have to do is go up to the Modano tab, click on Insert from Web, and select a revenue module that suits the hotels business, and once I click Insert, that entire piece of modeling will be built into my existing workbook. Not just the schedules themselves, so obvious assumption areas, but also obviously throughout all the financial statements. And this principle doesn't just apply for the kind of core engine itself. So if you need to build out a dashboard, for example, again, you go back, insert from web, choose a dashboard that matches what you're trying to communicate, and it'll be inserted directly into your model and hooked into all of your financials and detailed information. And that again is really at the heart of the whole Modano system. So the ability to build up and scale out models on an automated basis without having to work through detailed calculations and so on. And ultimately, it is just Excel. So for example, if you want to make a change to something, you can insert rows and add new calculations and so on. If you're trying to understand where a value comes from, you can still see the logic and understand how that's building up to that number. And for those of you who have been trapped on the moon for the last 10 years, there's also the traverse tool. So if you're in your financials and there's a value that you're trying to understand, crack open the traverse tool, and this will allow you to drill back down the calculation path to understand where that value comes from. So that little tool is, again, another Modano special and definitely worth the price of admission. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of a Modano model. So good luck with your model, and yeah, thanks for listening.